Okay, quick question. You know that one friend who leaves a party and texts you, "That was so fun," and 20 minutes later they're already asking when the next one is. And then you've got the other friend. Same party, same fun night, and they get home, shut the door, and just need 3 days to recover. Same event. Two completely different people walking away from it. Here's the wild part. 100 years ago, a guy figured out exactly why that happens. And he wasn't even trying to write a viral personality test. His name was Carl Jung, and he basically invented the words introvert and extravert. Yeah, those words you've used in 100 dating bios and Instagram captions? They came from one Swiss psychiatrist's actual theory of the mind. And get this, almost everyone using those words today is only using half of what he actually meant. Because Jung's real idea wasn't, some people like people, some people don't. It was way weirder, way deeper, and honestly way more useful than that. He mapped out 8 different ways a human brain can process the world. 8, not 2, and that map quietly became the DNA of one of the most famous personality tests on the planet. The one you've probably taken at work, the one with the 4 letters, even though Jung never built anything like that himself. So today we're doing the real version, not the Instagram bio version. We're talking about the guy, the theory, the messy breakup with Sigmund Freud that basically triggered his entire life's work, and why, 100 years later, this stuff still somehow explains why you and your roommate experience the exact same Tuesday completely differently. Let's start with the man himself, because honestly, his life is kind of unhinged in the best way. Carl Jung was born in 1875 in a tiny village in Switzerland. His dad was a pastor, and as a kid, Jung was, let's just say, a lot. He was quiet, he kept to himself, and he had these incredibly vivid dreams and strange inner fantasy worlds that felt, in his own words, more real to him than actual daily life. Most kids grow out of that. Jung didn't. He just started writing it all down, obsessively. And that habit, taking his own inner world dead seriously, basically became his entire career. He studied medicine, got into psychiatry back when psychiatry was still kind of the Wild West of science, and started working at a mental hospital in Zurich with patients who had serious, severe conditions. And while he was there, he built this test, a word association test, where he'd say a word and time how long it took you to respond, looking for the words that made you stumble. It sounds simple, but it was actually a clever way of finding the stuff people were unconsciously hiding from themselves. That test is still referenced in psychology today. Then, in the early 1900s, Jung read Sigmund Freud's work and basically became his biggest fan. He sent Freud his research. Freud loved it. And for a few years, these two were incredibly close. Like, Freud reportedly thought of Jung almost like a son, and everyone assumed Jung was going to be the guy who carried psychoanalysis into the future. But here's the thing about mentors and protégés. Eventually, someone disagrees, and Jung and Freud disagreed about something pretty fundamental. Freud believed almost everything in the human mind traces back to sex. Repressed desire, basically, underneath everything. Jung thought that was way too narrow. He thought the mind wasn't just some pressure cooker of suppressed urges. He thought it was actively trying to become whole, like it had a direction, a purpose. That disagreement didn't stay polite. By 1913, the friendship was completely over. And for Jung, that breakup wasn't just professional. It wrecked him personally. He described years afterward as this intense psychological crisis, strange visions, deep inner turmoil, basically a full confrontation with his own subconscious. And instead of hiding that breakdown, he used it. He treated his own unraveling as research material. And out of that mess came his entire school of thought, what he called analytical psychology. A lot of ideas you already know came out of Jung's head, even if you didn't know it. The shadow, the parts of yourself you don't want to look at. The persona, the mask you wear in public. The collective unconscious, all him. But the piece we're focused on today, the introvert-extravert thing, came from a book he published in 1921 called Psychological Types. So let's actually get into what he meant And this is the part almost everyone gets wrong. Introversion and extraversion, according to Jung, were never about being shy versus being outgoing. That's not it. It's about where your energy flows, inward or outward. Think of it less like a personality trait, and more like which direction your attention naturally points. An extrovert's attention flows outward, toward people, toward things happening around them, toward the world. The outside world is basically where their meaning comes from. They feel most alive when they're plugged into what's going on out there. An introvert's attention flows inward, toward their own thoughts, their own reactions, their inner world. Something happens outside, sure, but what actually matters to them is what that thing stirs up on the inside. Jung had this great little example. Picture two people watching the same sunset. The extrovert says, "Wow, look at that sky." Their focus is on the thing itself. The introvert says something more like, "That's making me feel something weird." Their focus already jumped inward, to their own reaction. Neither one is more sensitive or more shallow than the other. They're just pointed in different directions. And here's the part that gets left out constantly. Jung flat out said pure types don't exist. Nobody is 100% extrovert or 100% introvert. He called that a theoretical extreme, useful for explaining the idea, basically non-existent in real humans. Everyone's got both. One side usually runs the show, and the other side kind of sits in the back, less developed, less practiced. I'm what Jung called your shadow side of that trait. It doesn't vanish, it just doesn't get much stage time. Which means, and this is honestly the most useful part, you are not an introvert or an extrovert, the way you're like 5'7" or born in July. It's not a fixed label, it's a habit, a default setting, and defaults can shift. Okay, now here's where it gets genuinely interesting because most people stop at intro versus extra and miss the actual depth of what Jung built. Beyond just which direction your energy flows, Jung said there are 4 totally different tools your mind uses to process the world. 4 functions. First one, thinking. This is your logic mode. Cause and effect. Structure. Does this actually make sense? Pure analysis. Second, feeling. And quick note, Jung didn't mean emotional here. He meant a values function, deciding what's good, what's right, what matters. Not, I feel sad, more like, this feels wrong to me, or this person matters to me. Third, sensation. This is your 5 senses doing the work. What's actually, physically, concretely in front of you right now. Facts, details, the real, tangible present moment. Fourth, intuition. This is your radar for patterns and possibilities. The stuff underneath the surface. Where is this heading? What's the hidden connection here? You can't always explain why you sense it. You just do. Now here's the twist. Each of those 4 tools can run in either direction, inward or outward. So thinking can be extroverted or introverted. Same with feeling, same with sensation, same with intuition. That's not 4 types anymore. That's 8. Let me make this concrete, because it's actually kind of fun once you see it in real people. Extroverted thinking is your friend who runs everything like a project manager. External systems, clear rules. Here's the efficient way to do this. Introverted thinking is the person quietly building their own private logical framework in their head. Not because they need to explain it to anyone, just because they need it to make sense to them. Extroverted feeling is the person who walks into a room and immediately senses the mood and starts smoothing things over, keeping everyone connected. Introverted feeling is the person with this deep, quiet, intense set of personal values. They might never actually say out loud, but you can tell they're there. Extroverted sensation is your friend who's fully alive in the physical moment. First on the dance floor, first to try the weird food, totally plugged into their surroundings. Introverted sensation is more like they remember exactly how something felt, tasted, sounded, years later, and they're constantly comparing new experiences against that internal archive. Extroverted intuition is the person who's always 3 trends ahead, seeing where things are headed before anyone else does. Introverted intuition is quieter. It's the person who gets these sudden, strange, oddly specific insights that seem to come out of nowhere and are usually right. Everybody's got one of these 8 running the show, a second one backing it up, and the rest sitting in the shadows, underused. And that specific mix, that's basically your psychological fingerprint. And by the way, this 8-part system is literally the ancestor of the Myers-Briggs test, the one with the 4 letters. A mother-daughter duo, Catherine Briggs and Isabel Briggs Myers, took Jung's framework decades later and turned it into an actual questionnaire. Jung himself never made a test. He'd probably have some opinions about how it turned out. We'll get to that. But typing people wasn't actually the point for Jung. It was just a snapshot. Where you're standing right now. The real thing he cared about was something bigger, something he called individuation. Individuation is basically this: becoming a whole, integrated person over your entire life. Not by cutting parts of yourself off, but by slowly getting to know the parts you've been ignoring. Remember how everyone's got both introversion and extraversion, but one usually dominates while the other sits underdeveloped in the shadow. Individuation is the long, slow work of actually going and meeting that shadow side, not letting it run wild, not shoving it down further either, just getting to know it. And this actually plays out in real life in a pretty recognizable way. Someone who's deeply introverted and never develops any outward-facing muscle can end up isolated, cut off from exactly the kind of connection that would make their life richer. And someone who's deeply extroverted and never builds any inner life can hit this weird wall where they've got the job, the friends, the whole outward package, and still feel hollow, and they can't figure out why. Jung would say that's the underdeveloped side knocking, usually through weird moods you can't explain, or dreams, or this itch of dissatisfaction that doesn't match your actual circumstances. And this isn't a quick fix. Jung thought this kind of growth mostly kicks into gear in the second half of life, after you've already built the career, the family, the identity, when the bigger question starts creeping in. Okay, but what's this all actually for? 2 more quick concepts, because you've probably used these words without knowing where they came from. The persona, that's your public mask, the version of you that shows up to work, to a first date, to your in-laws. Totally normal to have one. Jung's warning was just, don't confuse the mask for the whole face. And the shadow, the stuff you push down, deny, or accidentally project onto other people. Not necessarily evil, just unacknowledged. Growth, for Jung, meant actually looking at it instead of pretending it's not there. And to be clear, individuation was never about becoming a different person. Jung wasn't saying force yourself to become an extrovert, or kill your feelings and become pure logic. It's the opposite. Stay who you are at your core. Just stop leaving the rest of yourself locked in the basement. All right, let's bust some myths, because a century of pop culture has mangled this pretty badly. Myth 1. Introverts are just scared of people, and extroverts are just confident. Nope. This was never about confidence. It's about what drains you and what fuels you. Plenty of introverts are fully comfortable, articulate, socially at ease. They just clock out of their social battery faster and need quiet to recharge. And plenty of anxious, nervous people are still, technically, extroverts. Their energy's still pointed outward. It's just currently uncomfortable out there. Myth 2. You're locked into one category forever, like a blood type. Also no. Jung was clear. Pure types don't exist. This is a dial, not a switch. You lean one direction more than the other. That's it. Myth 3. Your type is permanent and never shifts. Individuation literally disproves this. Jung thought people can genuinely develop the underused side of themselves over time. Someone who was painfully shy at 20 can absolutely become genuinely comfortable in rooms full of people at 50. Not because they became a different person, just a more developed one. And myth 4, the big one, people assume the Myers-Briggs test is basically Jung's theory, scientifically proven. It's really not the same thing, and it's worth actually understanding why. So here's the honest version. Jung built his theory off decades of clinical work, sitting with real patients, digging through mythology and religion, and being brutally honest about his own inner experience. It was thoughtful. It was deep. It was not, by modern standards, hard science. The actual test, the 16 personality types thing, came later, built by Catherine Briggs and her daughter Isabel Myers, starting in the 1940s, and it exploded. Companies use it for hiring. Career counselors use it. People use it on dating apps to explain themselves. Tens of millions of people have taken it. But here's the catch. Modern psychologists have pretty serious problems with it. If you take the test today and take it again in 6 weeks, there's a real chance you land in a totally different category, even though nothing about you actually changed. That's a reliability problem, and forcing people into strict either-or boxes doesn't match how these traits actually show up in real people. Most traits look more like a bell curve. Most people bunched in the middle, not split cleanly down two sides. And there's not great evidence it actually predicts things like job performance, despite how much companies lean on it. So academic psychology mostly moved towards something different now. The Big Five: openness, conscientiousness, extraversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, measured on sliding scales instead of forced categories. And notice, extraversion made the cut. It survived 100 years later as one of the 5 traits science actually still backs, which tells you Jung was onto something real, even if the 16-box test built on top of it later wasn't quite as solid. So both things are true at once. Jung's original insight, genuinely brilliant, genuinely ahead of its time. The test built on it decades later, not exactly rock-solid science. You're allowed to be skeptical of the 4-letter test and still respect the guy who started the conversation. Here's why any of this still matters, honestly. The words introvert and extrovert are just baked into how we talk now. Nobody says, "Hang on, let me explain the etymology," before using them on a first date. They just work as shorthand for how someone engages with the world. But there's something bigger buried in here too. Before Jung, psychiatry had this tendency to treat different as broken. Jung's whole framework quietly pushed back on that. The idea that being wired differently isn't a malfunction. It's just a different valid way of being a person. That idea didn't stay in academic journals. It leaked into culture. The whole introvert culture wave, books about quiet people, workplaces finally admitting open floor plans might be terrible. The general cultural permission to just need alone time without apologizing for it. A lot of that traces straight back to a Swiss guy writing in 1921. And honestly, the fact that people still take these tests, still argue about their type, still bring it up on dates, tells you something too. People really want a language for understanding their own minds. Jung's system stuck around for 100 years, not because it passed every scientific test, but because it actually gives people something useful, a way to explain themselves to themselves. So practically, what do you actually do with all this? First, use it as a starting point, not an identity you have to defend to the death. If you notice people drain you and solitude fills you back up, that's useful information. Test or no test. If it's the opposite, same deal. Second, notice which of those 4 functions feels effortless to you, and which one feels like work. That gap? That's basically a map of where you've got room to grow, if you want to. And third, don't use any of this to put people in boxes, or to excuse bad behavior with, "Well, that's just how I am." That was never Jung's point. His actual point was that understanding yourself is where growth starts, not where it stops. So let's bring it home. Jung's real idea was never, "You're one of 2 types." 'Twas, "Your energy points inward or outward." You've got 4 different tools for processing reality. Each one can point either direction, giving you 8 distinct flavors of mind. And underneath all of it, you're spending your whole life slowly becoming more whole. The goal was never to sort you into a box. It was to hand you a little bit of language for understanding yourself and the people around you a little more clearly. So genuinely, which one are you? Outer world or inner world? And out of those 4 functions, which one feels most like home? Tell me in the comments. And if this actually helped you make sense of something, hit subscribe. There's a lot more of this deep dive psychology stuff coming.